Before this starts, one thing. When the moment hits, drop one word in the comments. Whatever you felt. I read every single one every time. Now, what follows is the personal diary of Ambassador Keth-Vel-Sorn of the Dominion of 12 Suns, the most powerful administrative empire in this galactic region. He has delivered the submit or disappear ultimatum to 43 species across his career. Tomorrow morning he will deliver it to humanity. This is what he wrote the night before. These entries were recovered from the diplomatic archive 17 years after the events described. They were never meant to be read by anyone. I cannot sleep. I want to begin by noting that because it is unusual for me and because I think it belongs at the start of this record. I have been an ambassador for the Dominion for 63 years. I have delivered the offer 43 times. I have never lost sleep before a delivery. The offer is not a complicated procedure. It is the same words in every language, the same terms, the same timeline, the same two outcomes. Submit or disappear. 43 species in 63 years. Not one of them found a third option. I am lying in my quarters on the diplomatic vessel currently positioned at the edge of the Sol system, and I cannot sleep. And I am going to try to write down why. Because I think understanding why will either resolve the thing keeping me awake or make it more defined, and either of those outcomes is better than this one. Let me describe my preparation process because it matters for what I am about to write. Before each delivery, I review the intelligence file on the target species. This is standard. The file covers their technological level, their organizational capacity, their military capability, their historical record of response to external pressure. I read the file and I build a picture of how the delivery will go. This picture has been accurate 43 times. The picture is not always the same. Some species submit immediately, some negotiate, some resist briefly before accepting, some disappear in ways that are more or less drawn out depending on their capability. But the picture is always accurate in the sense that one of those two outcomes occurs, and I always knew in advance which category the species fell into. I read the human file 3 days ago. I built a picture. The picture showed a species that would resist briefly and then submit. Their capability does not support extended resistance. The rational outcome is submission. I know this. I have known it since I read the file, and I cannot sleep. I am going to try to describe the specific thing in the file that is keeping me awake. It is not their military capability. That is, as I said, insufficient for extended resistance. It is not their technological level, which is impressive for their developmental stage but well below what would be required to present a genuine challenge. It is something in the historical record. I have been reading their historical record for 3 days, and I keep finding the same thing in it that I cannot name precisely, and that my standard analytical frameworks have not been built to accommodate. The thing I keep finding is this. The humans have been given the choice before. Not by us, by their own history, by their circumstances. By the specific and repeated situations in which they have faced something that required them to either submit to the overwhelming pressure of what was in front of them, or cease to exist in their current form. And they have not, in 6,000 years of documented history, consistently chosen either of those options. They have chosen something that my frameworks file under anomaly and set aside, because anomaly is not a category that produces useful predictions. But I am reading the file and the anomaly keeps appearing and I cannot set it aside anymore because it is appearing too consistently to be anomaly. A thing that appears consistently is not anomaly. It is pattern. The pattern is this. When the humans face something that requires submission or cessation, they produce a third response that their frameworks apparently call neither. Not submission in the sense of accepting the terms presented to them. Not resistance in the sense of a direct confrontation they cannot win. Something that is a kind of lateral movement. A refusal to engage the situation on the terms in which it has been presented, combined with a search for the terms on which they can engage it more favorably. I have seen this in their internal conflicts, in their responses to natural disasters, in their economic recoveries from situations that should have produced permanent collapse. The pattern is consistent. The framework it produces is not submission and not disappearance. It is negotiation of the frame itself, a refusal to accept that the options presented are the complete set of available options. A search, sometimes frantic and sometimes patient and sometimes both simultaneously, for the option that was not on the list. I am a diplomat. I deliver the offer on behalf of the most powerful administrative empire in this galactic region. The offer has two options, and I am lying awake because I have spent 3 days reading the history of a species that has never, in 6,000 years, accepted that any situation had only two options. I want to record something specific from the historical data that has stayed with me since I read it 2 days ago. There was a period in their history, approximately 80 years before the present, when they faced an environmental catastrophe of their own making. The specifics are complex, but the situation was, in summary, this. They had spent several centuries modifying their planet's atmosphere in ways that were producing increasingly severe consequences for their civilization. The consequences were accelerating. The models they had produced all showed the same trajectory. The two obvious options were accept the consequences and manage the decline, or cease the activities that were producing the consequences at a pace that would require dismantling large portions of the industrial and economic infrastructure that their civilization depended on. Both options were, from a certain standpoint, forms of disappearance. The first was the disappearance of the world they had built. The second was the disappearance of the system that sustained them. I read their records from this period expecting to find one of those two outcomes, or a messy alternation between them. What I found instead was something I had to read 3 times to accept as accurately described. They built a third infrastructure, alongside the existing one. While the existing one was still operating, they began constructing an entirely new energy and industrial system based on different principles. The construction was expensive and difficult and politically contentious and technically complex. They did it anyway, not instead of managing the existing system. In addition to, simultaneously, they refused to choose between the two bad options and spent the next several decades building the option that was not on the list. I do not know how to assess this as a diplomatic matter. I know it is keeping me awake. It is late, significantly later than when I started writing. I have been writing for several hours, and I have not resolved the thing that is keeping me awake. I am going to try a different approach. Instead of describing what I found in the historical data that troubles me, I am going to try to describe what I think will happen tomorrow morning. This is a standard diplomatic technique for preparation, walking through the scenario in advance to identify where complications might arise. I have done this before 43 deliveries. I am going to do it now. Tomorrow morning, at the time agreed with their diplomatic division, I will transmit the offer. The offer will be clear. The terms will be presented as they have been presented 43 times before. The species will have 24 standard hours to respond. Their response will be one of the following. They will submit, in which case the process of integration into the Dominion administrative structure will begin. They will attempt to negotiate terms, in which case I will explain that the terms are not negotiable, which is standard, and they will either submit or proceed to the second option. They will decline, in which case the consequences specified in the offer will be applied. These are the options. This is what will happen. I know this. I have done this 43 times. I am going to transmit the offer tomorrow morning, and the scenario will resolve in one of these ways. I know this. I cannot sleep. I have been trying to think about why 43 previous deliveries did not produce this. Why I am lying awake before this one and not before any of the others. The answer I keep arriving at is something I want to record because I think it is honest, and honesty in a personal record, if not in diplomatic communication, seems important. The answer is, I have never before delivered the offer to a species that I believed was going to do something I had not predicted. Not believed in the sense of having evidence. Believed in the sense that something in the data, something I cannot fully articulate and cannot convert into a proper analytical finding, is telling me that what I think I know about how this will go may not be correct. I have 43 precedents. The precedents all show the same two outcomes. The evidence from this species' own history shows a pattern of producing outcomes that were not in the presented options. Those two things are in conflict. My training and my experience say, the precedents apply, the outcome will be one of the two. Something else is saying, this species has not behaved according to precedent in 6,000 years of their own history. Why would they start now because I am presenting them why? A precedent, I cannot resolve this conflict, I cannot sleep. I got up and made something warm to drink. I have been sitting with the drink going cold and reading more of their historical data, and I want to record what I found because I think it is relevant to why I cannot sleep. I found an account of an individual human who was placed in a situation with two options. The situation was significant. This individual's life was genuinely at stake, not as a figure of speech, but as an accurate description of the circumstances. The two options were both forms of loss. Both involved giving up something essential. The account describes this individual considering the options for a very short period and then doing something that the account itself describes as declining to participate in the framing. The individual looked at the two options and said, as recorded in the account, that they did not accept the premise. That the premise that these were the only two options was the thing they were refusing, not the options themselves. And then they found a third option and took it. The account does not describe this as heroic or unusual. It describes it as characteristic, as something this individual had done before and would do again. I read this and I thought, this is one person. This is one account of one person's decision in one situation. And then I thought, their entire history is full of accounts like this one. 6,000 years of individuals and groups and civilizations declining to participate in the framing. Refusing the premise. Finding the third option. One person is an individual. A pattern across 6,000 years of documented history is a civilizational characteristic. I am going to deliver the offer tomorrow morning to a civilization that has a documented civilizational characteristic of refusing the premise. I cannot sleep. I want to write something that I would not put in any official communication, and that I am not certain I would say aloud even to someone I trusted completely. But this is a personal record, and I think the personal record should contain what I actually think. What I actually think is this. The offer has a premise. The premise is that submit and disappear are the complete set of options available to any species that receives it. This premise has been accurate 43 times. It has been accurate because 43 species, when they received the offer, accepted the premise. They looked at the two options and they chose within them. Some chose submit. Some chose disappear. All of them accepted that those were the options. What I cannot verify from the historical data I have reviewed is whether those are actually the only options, or whether those are the only options because every species so far has accepted that they are the only options. These are different things. A premise that has never been challenged is not the same as a premise that cannot be challenged. I have been delivering the offer for 63 years and I have never questioned the premise because the premise has never been questioned. The humans may question it. The humans may look at submit and disappear and say, we do not accept that those are the only options, and I do not know what happens then. The protocol does not include guidance for that scenario. The offer has been delivered 43 times. It has never been received by a species whose documented civilizational characteristic is refusing the premise. It is early morning now. I have not slept. The delivery is in 3 hours. I want to use these hours to do something I have not done before a delivery and that I suspect my superiors would find irregular. I want to think carefully about what it would mean if the humans find the third option. Not for the Dominion's strategic position. I have thought about that and I have conclusions I will not record here because this is a personal record, not a strategic assessment. I want to think about what it would mean as a matter of principle. The offer exists because the Dominion has determined that species in this galactic region must either integrate into the administrative structure or be removed from it. This determination was made for reasons that are, from the Dominion's perspective, reasonable. The administrative structure produces stability. Stability produces conditions in which civilizations can develop without the kind of chaotic conflict that has historically destroyed promising species before they reached their potential. The offer is not, from the Dominion's perspective, malicious. It is administrative. It is the mechanism by which order is maintained. I have believed this for 63 years. I believe it now. And I am also lying awake at 4 in the morning thinking about a species whose entire history is a documentation of what happens when a thing that seems like a complete set of options turns out not to be one. Because if they find the third option, and if the third option is real and viable, then the premise of the offer, that submit and disappear are the complete set, is not accurate. And if the premise is not accurate, then the 63 years and the 43 deliveries were built on something that was not what I believed it to be. 3 hours until the delivery. I want to record something that occurred to me in the last hour that I have not been able to set aside. I have been thinking about the 43 species that received the offer and chose within its terms. Most of them survived. The ones that submitted are still part of the Dominion's administrative structure. Their civilizations continue. Their development continues, though within certain parameters. I have believed for 63 years that this is a good outcome for them. Better than disappearance. And it is better than disappearance. I'm not questioning that. What I am questioning, sitting here at 4 in the morning, is whether it is better than the third option. Whether the species that submitted did so because submit was the best available option, or because they accepted the premise that it was one of only 2 options. Because if they accepted a false premise, then what I have been delivering for 63 years is not the choice I thought I was delivering. It is not submit or disappear. It is, accept that these are your only options and choose between them. And the humans, whose history is full of moments where they decline to accept that a presented set of options was the complete set, may reveal by their response whether the premise has always been false. Whether there was always a third option that no one took because no one refused the framing. I am going to find out in 3 hours. I cannot sleep. 1 hour until the delivery. I am going to record what I think will actually happen, as distinct from what is supposed to happen according to the protocol. I think the humans will receive the offer. I think they will read it carefully. I think they will discuss it in the specific way they discuss things, not quickly, not to reach the most efficient conclusion, but to examine the thing from every available angle before they respond. I think the discussion will take most of the 24 hours. And I think at the end of the discussion, whatever they produce will not be one of the 2 options in the offer. I do not know what it will be. That is precisely the thing I cannot predict, and that is precisely what has kept me awake all night. I have been an ambassador for 63 years. I have delivered the offer 43 times. I know what happens when a species accepts the premise. I do not know what happens when a species refuses it. And I think, in 3 hours, I am going to find out. Whatever they produce, whatever the thing is that is neither submission nor disappearance, I want to be prepared to see it clearly, not through the framework of the offer and its 2 options. Clearly, as it is, because I think what they produce will be significant. And I think I owe it to 63 years of doing this work to see it for what it is rather than for what the protocol says it should be. The delivery is in 20 minutes. I want to write one last entry before I go. I have been an ambassador for the Dominion for 63 years. I have believed in the work I do. I believe in stability. I believe in the administrative structure that allows civilizations to develop without destroying each other and themselves. I have delivered the offer 43 times, and I have believed each time that I was doing something necessary. I still believe that. I'm not writing these entries because I have lost faith in the work. I am writing them because I have spent a night reading about a species that has spent 6,000 years demonstrating that necessity and possibility are not the same thing, that the necessary thing and the only possible thing are different things, that a situation that appears to have 2 options may have more, if the beings in the situation are willing to do the specific and difficult work of refusing the frame and finding the other ones. I am going to deliver the offer in 20 minutes. Whatever they do with it, whether they submit, whether they attempt to disappear, or whether they do something I have not predicted and that my frameworks do not have a category for, I am going to watch carefully. I am going to record it, and I am going to try to see it clearly as what it is, rather than as what the protocol says it should be. Because 63 years of this work and one sleepless night have taught me something that I think is true and that I have not said in any official communication in my career. The options presented are not always the complete set. The humans know this, and tomorrow morning they are going to show me whether they were right. I want to record what I know about the 43 previous deliveries and the species that received them. Not the outcomes, those are in the official record, what I know about the process, what I observed in each case when I watched them receive the offer and process it and respond. The first thing I know is that in every case, the species understood what the offer was. None of them were confused about the terms. None of them misread the situation. They understood clearly that they were being told, integrate with the dominion or be removed. The understanding was not the variable. The response was the variable. And the response, in every case, was to work within the terms. The species that submitted worked within the submit option. The species that disappeared worked within the disappear option. None of them worked outside the terms. None of them questioned whether the terms were the complete set. I have been thinking about why. My current best explanation is this. The offer is delivered by the Dominion, which is the most powerful administrative entity in this galactic region. The power behind the offer is real and visible and has been demonstrated. When a species receives the offer, it receives it with full awareness of that power. And full awareness of overwhelming power in every species I have observed produces a specific response. The assumption that the options presented by the overwhelmingly powerful entity are the complete options, because it seems irrational to believe otherwise. Because the power should be sufficient to make the terms stick. Because working outside the terms seems like it would only produce the faster application of the second option. 43 species made this reasonable assumption. The humans may not. Not because they are unaware of the power. Because their history suggests they do not reason from the assumption that overwhelming power means complete options. They have faced overwhelming things before. They have not accepted overwhelming as complete. I want to record something about what happened in the 22nd delivery. This was 31 years ago. The species was the Vel-Keth, a civilization at a higher developmental level than the humans are now, more technologically advanced, more resource-rich, better positioned on paper to resist. They received the offer. They debated it for 18 of the 24 hours. They came back to me with what they called a counterproposal. The counterproposal asked for modifications to the terms of integration, specific provisions about the maintenance of their cultural practices, specific limits on how Dominion administrative decisions could affect their internal governance, specific protections for their scientific research programs. They were negotiating the terms of submission. They were not refusing the premise. They were accepting that the options were submit or disappear, and they were asking for better conditions within the submit option. I reported this to the Dominion's Council. The Council declined the modifications. The Vel-Keth submitted on the original terms. This is what negotiating within the terms looks like. It is different from refusing the terms. The Vel-Keth accepted that the terms were the complete set and tried to improve their position within that set. What I am thinking about tonight is what refusing the terms looks like. Not refusing the specific terms in favor of better versions of the same terms. Refusing the frame that says these are the only two options. The Vel-Keth were sophisticated. They were capable. They did not do that. The humans, who are less capable by current measurement, may. I want to record a conversation I had with my junior attaché, a young diplomat named Keth-Vel-Sorn who has been with me for the past 3 years. She is excellent at her work and I value her judgment. Yesterday evening, before I retired to my quarters and failed to sleep, I mentioned to her that I was spending more time on the intelligence file than usual. She asked why. I said, something in the data is not sitting correctly with me. She asked, what specifically? I said, their pattern of response to situations with limited options. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I noticed that too. I said, and she said, I think the pattern is real. I think it is not anomaly. I think it is how they are constituted. I said, that is the same conclusion I reached. She said, what do you think it means for the delivery? I said, I do not know. She said, do you think they will find something outside the terms? I said, I think it is possible. She said, what happens to the protocol if they do? I looked at her for a moment. She is 22 years into a diplomatic career that has never included a delivery to a species that refused the premise. Neither has mine. I said, I do not know. She said, does the protocol include guidance for that scenario? I said, no. She said, then we will have to determine the appropriate response in the moment. I said, yes. She was quiet again. Then she said, I find I am not concerned about that. I said, why? She said, because if they find something outside the terms, it will mean the terms were not complete. And if the terms were not complete, finding what was outside them seems like a good outcome. I looked at her for a long time. Then I said, yes, I think I agree. She went back to her work. I went to my quarters and did not sleep. I have been thinking about what the third option might look like if it exists. Not what form it would take specifically. I cannot predict that, and I have not tried. I have been thinking about the conditions that would make it possible. The conditions are specific and not trivially met. First, the species receiving the offer would have to believe, without sufficient evidence, that a third option exists. The evidence against it is considerable. 43 previous deliveries with no third option produced. The full weight of the dominion behind the two-option premise. The rational calculation pointing firmly toward submission as the better of two unpleasant choices. To believe a third option exists against all of this evidence would require something that most species, in the presence of overwhelming power, do not maintain: the conviction that their own assessment of the possibility space is not necessarily bounded by the options presented to them. The second condition is the willingness to do the work. Finding a third option that is real and viable is not easy. It requires understanding the underlying goal well enough to propose an alternative mechanism for achieving it. It requires specificity and workability and sufficient credibility to be considered rather than dismissed. And it requires doing all of this under time pressure while facing the alternative of disappearance. These conditions are high. The human's history suggests they have met comparable conditions before. Not with alien administrative ultimatums, with everything else they have faced, and they have met them by doing something that I have come to think of as characteristic. They refused to accept that the difficulty of finding the third option was evidence that the third option did not exist. Something woke me from a half-sleep an hour ago. Not a sound, a thought. The thought was this: the premise of the offer is not only that submit and disappear are the complete options. The premise also includes something unstated. The unstated premise is that what the Dominion wants is the specific thing the offer describes: integration into the administrative structure or removal from the system. But what the Dominion actually wants, at the level beneath the specific mechanism, is regional stability. The offer is a mechanism for achieving regional stability. The offer is not the same thing as regional stability. I have been delivering the offer for 63 years, and I have never separated those two things in my thinking, because the offer has been the mechanism, and I have been focused on the mechanism. The humans have, in their history, repeatedly separated mechanisms from goals, found that the mechanism being used to pursue a goal was not the only possible mechanism, built alternative mechanisms when the existing ones were insufficient or problematic. If they apply this to the offer, if they separate the mechanism from the goal and ask what the goal actually is, and then propose alternative mechanisms for achieving it, then the third option is not a refusal of the Dominion's underlying interest. It is an alternative path to the same destination. That is a very different thing from refusing the premise entirely. That is engaging with the premise at a deeper level than the premise expects to be engaged with. I do not know if they will do this. I know their history shows they are capable of it. I am going to find out in approximately 2 hours. I want to write about the moment I have been avoiding writing about. The moment I recognized that I was not just doing preparation and that the preparation had crossed into something else. It was the third day of reading the file. I had been reading for approximately 12 hours that day. I was reading an account of a period in their history when their civilization was divided against itself, a deep internal conflict that by all historical measures should have ended in either the victory of one side and the destruction of the other, or the collapse of both. Neither of those things happened. What happened instead was a process of negotiation and restructuring that produced something different from either side's original position, something neither side had been asking for, something that was not on the table at the beginning of the process. I read this account and I put the file down and I sat for a long time and I thought, this is what they do. This is the specific thing that is different about them, not that they fight and survive. Many species fight and survive. They fight and survive and then negotiate the frame of what comes next and build something that was not in the original frame. They do not just outlaw. Since the conflict, they use the conflict to find the thing that neither side was able to see while the conflict was defining the available options. I sat with that for a long time, and then I thought, I am going to deliver the submit or disappear ultimatum to a species that uses conflict to find options that were not visible while the conflict was defining the options. And I am going to do it in 3 days. And I put the file down and I went and stood at the window and looked at the stars for a while. And then I went back to the file, because the preparation mattered, and because I realized I was not entirely certain I wanted the delivery to go the way it had always gone. I want to write about the 43, not as a professional record, as something more personal. I have delivered the offer 43 times. 43 mornings I woke up and prepared and transmitted and waited and received a response that was within the expected parameters. 43 species that accepted the premise and chose within it. Some of those choices were made quickly. Some were made slowly, with visible difficulty. Some of the species that submitted had a quality in their final communications before the submission that I have never described in an official record because it was not analytically relevant. A quality that I would describe, if I were being completely honest, as resignation. Not defeat. Defeat implies a fight that was lost. Resignation. The specific quality of something that has seen the walls of the available options and has accepted that the walls are the walls. I recognized it because I know what resignation looks like. I have been in situations where the options were constrained, and I chose within the constraints, and that choosing felt like that. The humans may not know that feeling in the same way. Their history suggests they have regularly treated walls as something to be examined rather than accepted. I have been in this service for 63 years, and I have never envied a species I was delivering the offer to. I think I may be envying these ones slightly. Not for their position is difficult, for the specific quality in them that may allow them to look at the walls and ask whether they are actually walls. The delivery is in 10 minutes, the last entry before I transmit. I have been awake all night. I have written more than I expected to write. I have said things in these pages that I would not say in any official capacity and that I may not say to anyone after this. I want to end with what I believe, clearly and without the qualifications of diplomatic language. I believe the humans will not submit. I believe they will not disappear. I believe they will do something that my frameworks do not have a category for, and that the Dominion's protocol does not have guidance for. I believe this because I have read their history for 3 days, and their history is the documentation of a species that has been in situations like this one, not diplomatically, but structurally, in the sense of facing a constraint that appeared complete and working until they found what was beyond it, and has consistently found what was beyond it. I believe they will find it again. I do not know what they will find. I am going to transmit the offer in 10 minutes and then I am going to wait and I am going to see. And whatever they produce, whatever the thing is that is neither submit nor disappear, I am going to read it carefully, with the specific care that I have not given to any of the 43 previous responses, because the 43 previous responses confirm the premise. This one, I believe, will complicate it. And something that complicates a premise you have held for 63 years deserves care, transmitting in 10 minutes. Keth-Vel-Sorn, Ambassador. End of personal record. This final entry was written 17 years after the previous entries by a different hand, and added to the archive at the request of Ambassador Keth-Vel-Sorn upon his retirement. It reads as follows. 17 years ago, I delivered the submit or disappear ultimatum to humanity. They did not submit. They did not disappear. What they did, across 22 hours and 47 minutes of the 24 hours I gave them, was to produce something that the Dominion's protocol had no category for. They called it a counter-framework. It was a document of approximately 40,000 words in their primary administrative language that did three things. First, it acknowledged the legitimacy of the Dominion's interest in regional stability. Second, it proposed a set of alternative mechanisms for achieving regional stability that did not require species to submit to external administrative control. Third, it offered to work with the Dominion to develop and test these mechanisms across a defined period, with specific benchmarks and review processes. It was not a rejection of the offer. It was a refusal to accept that the offer was the only form the underlying goal could take. I read it in the remaining hour and 17 minutes of the 24-hour window. I transmitted it to the Dominion's Administrative Council with a note that said, I believe this requires consideration before a response is issued. The consideration took 11 months. The response, when it came, accepted the counter-framework on a provisional basis. The provisional period lasted 6 years. The mechanisms the humans proposed, refined over those 6 years through a process that involved the Dominion's administrative structures and the humans' diplomatic division and 14 other species that had requested to participate, are now the basis of what is called the Cooperative Administrative Framework. 41 of the 43 species that had previously received and accepted the offer have applied to transition to the new framework. The Dominion's Administrative Council has approved 37 of those applications. The humans found the third option. It was real and it was viable. The premise was not as complete as I had believed. I have spent 17 years thinking about what that means. I have not finished thinking about it. I do not expect to finish. What the Dominion's Council received, 22 hours and 47 minutes after the offer was transmitted, was a document that no one in the Council's history had expected to receive. Ambassador Keth-Vel-Sorn's account of reading it, written in his official report filed the following day, is clinical in tone and careful in its language, as his official reports always are. But 17 years later, in retirement, he was asked by a historian what he remembered about the moment he read the response. He said, I remember reading the first section, which acknowledged the Dominion's legitimate interest in regional stability, and thinking that this was a sophisticated submission with honorable framing. I remember reading the second section, which proposed alternative mechanisms for achieving the stability, and feeling something that I had not felt in 63 years of diplomatic work. I had to read it twice before I understood what I was feeling. What I was feeling was surprise, genuine surprise. The kind that means you have encountered something you did not predict and that your frameworks did not prepare you for. In 63 years, I had not been genuinely surprised by a diplomatic communication. The humans surprised me, not because what they proposed was impossible. It was not impossible. It was detailed and specific and workable. Because they had seen, in 22 hours and 47 minutes, what I had been looking for in 3 days of file review without fully articulating it. They had seen that the offer's mechanism and the offer's goal were different things. They had seen the goal and proposed a path to it that did not require the mechanism, and they had done it in 40,000 words of careful, specific, credible alternative. I read it and I thought, the premise was not complete, and then I transmitted to the Council and said, this requires consideration. And I went and made something warm to drink, and I sat for a long time thinking about 43 deliveries and what they had, and had not told me about what was possible. The Cooperative Administrative Framework, which the humans proposed, and which now governs the relationship between the Dominion and 41 of the 43 species that previously received the offer, is not a perfect system. Its architects, who include human diplomats and Dominion administrators and representatives of 14 other species who asked to participate in its development, would be the first to say this. It has implementation challenges and ongoing disputes and provisions that are not as clear as they should be, and areas where the original vision has not fully been realized. It is, in other words, the kind of thing that complex beings working on complex problems actually produce, something real and imperfect and still being improved. What it is not is one of the two options from the offer. It is the third option, the one that was not on the list. The one that the humans found in 22 hours and 47 minutes of working, because they declined to accept that the list they were given was complete. Ambassador Keth-Vel-Sorn attended the signing ceremony for the framework's founding document 17 years after the delivery. He was the most senior diplomat in the room. He did not speak at the ceremony. He stood at the back and watched the signing, and by his own account, felt something he described in his diary that night as the appropriate feeling for a person who has spent 63 years delivering a complete list that turned out not to be complete. He did not name the feeling. He wrote only that it was appropriate and that he was glad to have lived long enough to feel it. The lesson of this story is not about diplomacy, and it is not about strategy. It is about what you do when someone hands you a list of your options and tells you it is complete. The humans looked at submit or disappear and said, "We do not accept that this is the complete list," not aggressively, not in denial of the power behind the ultimatum, with full awareness of what they were facing and full awareness that the thing they were refusing was backed by something much more capable than they were. They said, "We do not accept the premise," and then they did the work. 40,000 words of detailed, specific, workable alternative, not a refusal without a replacement. A refusal with a better answer. That is the lesson. When someone presents you with a list of your options, the first question is not which option to choose. The first question is whether the list is complete. And if the list is not complete, the answer is not to choose from the incomplete list. The answer is to do the work of finding what is missing. The humans spent 22 hours and 47 minutes doing that work, 40,000 words of it. And the thing that was missing turned out to be real. Drop one word in the comments. Whatever this story did to you, I am reading them all. Subscribe to Human HFY. The next episode is a completely different voice, a completely different angle. That is the promise. Every time.